What are the other alternatives? Well, of course, there are some who engage in magical thinking and imagine that some magic new technology will suddenly appear that will allow us at the last minute to avert this global catastrophe. They believe so much in the power of technology to act as humanity's savior that they have lulled themselves into a false belief in a quick fix. That position is the moral equivalent of denying the existence of the crisis itself. We need a treaty. And we know from past experience that international treaties embodying a market-based approach work. We know that the Kyoto Treaty resulted in significant reductions already in the European Union, to take one example. We know that in the United States, a market-based approach was extremely successful in reducing other forms of pollution, including sulfur dioxide. And we have every indication that it can work again. What we need here is a fair, ambitious, and binding agreement. There is no alternative. We also know that when we leave Copenhagen at the end of this week, that the road ahead is fraught with further difficulties. We know that what we accomplish here will serve as the basis for another meeting next year to finalize a treaty. We also know that between now and then, the United States Senate will vote on legislation to cut the emissions of global warming pollution. I can tell you, having worked with the members of the United States Senate, that I believe they are very close to having sufficient votes to pass this legislation. As a citizen of the United States, and no more, I will ask those among my fellow U.S. citizens who share my sense of urgency to join me in asking President Obama and the leadership of the United States Senate to set a deadline of April 22nd, 2010, the 40th anniversary of Earth Day, for final action on the U.S. legislation. As a member of the world community, and no more, I would ask those of you here who share my sense of urgency to join me in asking for an early date for the next meeting of ministers and heads of state. I do not believe that we can wait until next November or next December. I do not believe that we should set merely an interim meeting between now and the end of next year. I do not believe it is wise to be oblivious to the inadvisability of meeting during America's midterm elections next fall. So I would like to ask you to join with me in proposing that the next meeting of ministers and heads of state take place in July in Mexico City. I have reason to believe that the Mexican government is willing to consider undertaking the enormous amount of work that would be involved to move the date of the next meeting to the middle of the summer. But in order to make that meeting a success, we first must make this meeting a success. And that means finding, for the issues that are still in contention here, solutions and compromises that allow a binding agreement. These issues include the scale of financial support forthcoming from developed countries and the measures necessary to give the world community confidence that the pledges made here will be honored and that the world community will have an ability to see for itself whether or not these pledges are being honored. Frankly, I believe these two issues are linked. The demands for transparency have often been leveled at China and other nations that have been reluctant to allow the world community to obtain the information necessary to verify the progress of their intended mitigation measures, both supported and non-supported. But this issue of transparency should also be applied to the financial pledges from the developed countries. How long have developing nations been frustrated by the lack of transparency needed to verify the progress by developed countries in honoring their pledges of financial support? How many times have questions been raised about whether or not a new pledge is actually the repurposing of an old pledge? How many times has the same money been pledged 2, 3, and 4 times? We need transparency for developed countries, developing countries, and emerging economies. In the case of both of these measures, the pledge of additional near-term, medium-term, and long-term financial support, and the pledge of mitigation measures that grow in ambition over time. In both cases, there is a lack of confidence that the nations making the pledges will follow through on those pledges. An unwillingness to feel excitement over the midterm and long-term numbers because of concerns that those parts of their pledges will soon be forgotten. Full transparency, both for the pledges and deliverance of financial support and for the progress or lack thereof on mitigation measures, in both cases, full transparency can build the confidence of the world community that these pathways that are being described will be pathways that are actually traveled, so that when the world community, with access to information to measure the progress, the world community can immediately say, wait a minute, we notice that you've deviated from the pathway that you have charted for us. And if transparency is applied to both of these measures, then it has a feeling of fairness and equality. The world community should know that pledges of new support are not going to result in repositioning of old pledges. And at the same time, it is difficult for me to understand why the world should not also ask for the ability to see for itself whether or not the pledges of mitigation from the largest global warming polluters in the world, those most responsible for the future threats to the integrity of the Earth's ecological system, are commitments that are in fact being honored, whether those pledges are for mitigation that is supported or unsupported. We must remember that we really are all in this together. Our world is filled with unfairness and inequity. But these problems will only be exacerbated if we failed to solve this crisis.